Imagine bone-deep, cold, smoky air, and snoring warriors all huddled in a cramped wooden hut. This was comfort, Viking style. Tonight, we slip into the frost-bitten silence of a Norse winter night, where warmth came from sheep wool, firewood smoke, and body heat. But it wasn't all cozy cloaks and epic tales. From lice-ridden bedding to frozen water buckets by dawn, we uncover what home sweet home really meant for Viking families trying to survive the endless dark. Let's step quietly into the longhouse, and let the cold winds of the past lull you to sleep. If strange, forgotten details of how people once lived and slept help you unwind at night, you're in the right hut, dost. Subscribe now and speak the bell icon so you never miss a slow, smoky bedtime journey through the past. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? It's always amazing to see how far our quiet little stories are reaching. You wake before dawn in your Viking longhouse, and the first sensation that greets you isn't sight or sound, but warmth. Even in the depths of a Scandinavian winter, when the world outside lies buried under 3 feet of snow, and the wind howls like the wolves of Fenrir himself, the interior of your dwelling maintains a steady, livable temperature. This isn't magic. It's the result of centuries of accumulated wisdom about surviving in one of Earth's most challenging climates. Wisdom that your great-great-grandfather's grandfather passed down through generations of bitter winters. The longhouse. Around you stretches nearly 60 feet from end to end, its wooden frame rising 15 feet to the peak of its turf-covered roof. But what makes this structure remarkable isn't its size, it's the ingenious way every element has been designed to capture, retain, and distribute heat throughout the long months when the sun barely crests the horizon. The foundation, beneath your feet, tells the first part of this story. Your ancestors didn't simply build on bare earth, they carefully selected and laid a foundation of flat stones, each one chosen for its ability to absorb heat during the day and radiate it slowly through the night. These stones, quarried from nearby hillsides and transported by ox cart during the brief summer months, form thermal masses that store the warmth from your central hearth and release it gradually, like a primitive but effective radiant heating system. Above this stone foundation, the wooden frame of your longhouse follows principles that wouldn't be out of place in a modern architect's handbook. The vertical posts, hewn from oak trees that grew for decades in the harsh Scandinavian climate, are spaced precisely to allow the walls to bow outward at the center. This boat-like shape isn't merely aesthetic, it creates a larger interior, volume at the warmest part of the house, where the central hearth generates the most heat, while tapering toward the ends, where doors and storage areas require less space and can tolerate cooler temperatures. The walls themselves represent perhaps the most sophisticated element of Viking winter comfort technology. In regions where timber was abundant, your ancestors constructed walls using a technique they called stick building. Vertical wooden posts driven deep into the ground and connected with horizontal planks that interlocked with the precision of a ship's hull. But in Iceland and other regions where trees grew slowly and wood was precious, they developed an entirely different approach that would prove even more effective at retaining heat. Here, the walls consist of blocks of turf, not the thin grass covering you might imagine, but substantial chunks of earth held together by dense root systems cut in early autumn when the ground had maximum moisture content but hadn't yet frozen solid. These turf blocks, each weighing 50 pounds or more, were stacked like enormous green bricks to create walls 3 feet thick. As winter progressed and the turf blocks dried, they formed an incredibly effective insulation system, the organic matter and trapped air providing thermal resistance while the sheer mass of earth stored and released heat with remarkable efficiency. The roof above your head completes this thermal envelope with its own layer of living insulation. Rather than the wooden shingles or thatch you might expect, your longhouse roof consists of layers of birch bark topped with more turf, creating a thick blanket that not only sheds rain and snow, but actually improves its insulating properties as the grass roots continue to grow and interweave. In deep winter, snow accumulates on this roof to create yet another insulating layer, forming what modern architects would recognize as a highly efficient thermal roof system. But perhaps the most ingenious aspect of your longhouse's design lies not in its walls or roof, but in its interior layout. The central corridor, where you now stand, features a packed dirt floor covered with a layer of ash from countless fires. This ash serves multiple purposes. It absorbs moisture from cooking and breathing. It provides a clean walking surface that can be swept and refreshed, and it acts as an additional insulating layer between your feet and the cold earth below. On either side of this central corridor, raised wooden benches extend the length of the house. These benches, topped with thick wooden planks and covered with layers of sheepskin and woolen blankets, serve as seats during the day and beds at night. But their elevation isn't merely for comfort. By raising the sleeping and sitting surfaces 18 inches above the floor, the benches place occupants in the warmest layer of air, since heat naturally rises from the central fire. The key genius of this system becomes apparent when you consider how it functions as an integrated whole. Heat from the central hearth rises to warm the air near the ceiling, then circulates along the length of the house before cooling and descending near the walls. The thick turf walls absorb this heat and radiate it back slowly, creating convection, currents that distribute warmth throughout the interior. Meanwhile, the raised benches place the house's occupants in the optimal zone of this thermal circulation, ensuring that even in the coldest weather, you can sleep comfortably without requiring constant attention to the fire. Yet even as you appreciate these sophisticated design elements, you're aware that the true test of your longhouse's thermal efficiency is still to come. Outside, the winter is deepening, and the coldest months lie ahead. The systems your ancestors built into these walls and floors and roofs will soon face their greatest challenge. When the temperature difference between inside and outside reaches 50 degrees or more, and the success or failure of these thermal strategies will determine not just comfort, but survival itself. The heart of your longhouse beats with fire, but this isn't the simple campfire you might imagine. The central hearth that dominates the main room represents the culmination of generations of experimentation with combustion, heat distribution, and air management in an enclosed space. As you tend the coals this winter morning, adding carefully split birch logs to the glowing embers, you're participating in a daily ritual that balances survival against the constant threat of suffocation, a delicate dance between fire and air that your ancestors perfected over centuries of cold, dark winters. The hearth itself stretches nearly 20 feet along the central corridor of your longhouse, its edges defined by carefully selected stones that have been shaped and fitted to create a long, narrow fire pit. These stones weren't chosen randomly. Each one came from riverbeds or quarries where water and weather had tested their ability to withstand repeated heating and cooling without cracking. Some of the larger stones show the careful work of your ancestors' tools, hammer marks where they've been shaped to fit precisely together, creating a fire pit that channels heat efficiently while containing sparks and embers. But the sophistication of this heating system extends far beyond the stone-lined pit. The hearth includes compartments built into its structure, small alcoves where pots can be kept warm without active cooking, where tools can be heated before use, and where bread, can be baked using residual heat from the main fire. These compartments transform your central fire from a simple heat source into a complete thermal management system, allowing you to extract maximum benefit from every log burned. Above your head, the management of smoke and air represents perhaps the most critical aspect of longhouse design. Your ancestors faced a fundamental challenge: how to allow smoke to escape while retaining as much heat as possible. Their solution involved a series of openings in the roof, not a single large hole that would hemorrhage warm air, but several smaller openings strategically placed to create controlled drafts. These smoke holes work on principles that wouldn't be fully understood by European science for another several centuries. As hot air and smoke rise from your fire, they create a pressure differential that draws fresh air in through carefully designed gaps around doors and walls. But the positioning and size of the roof openings ensure that this incoming air is warmed by the rising smoke before it reaches the living areas of the house. The result is a natural ventilation system that provides fresh air without creating the bone-chilling drafts that could make the longhouse uninhabitable. The entrance to your longhouse demonstrates another crucial element of this air management system. Rather than a single door opening directly into the main room, your ancestors built an antechamber, a small, unheated space that serves as an airlock between the bitter exterior and the warm interior. When someone enters from outside, they first pass through this antechamber, allowing the frigid air that accompanies them to mix with slightly warmer air before entering the main living space. This seemingly simple design feature prevents the sudden drafts that could disrupt the fire's draft and fill the house with smoke. The fuel you feed to this fire represents another aspect of Viking winter wisdom that modern people often overlook. Your woodshed, built adjacent to the longhouse and connected by a covered walkway, contains wood that was cut, split, and seasoned according to a precise annual cycle. The birch logs you're adding to the fire this morning were felled 2 winters ago, during the coldest part of the previous winter, when the sap was down and the wood would season most effectively. But your fuel supply extends beyond simple firewood. In the corners of your longhouse you maintain stores of other combustible materials, strips of birch bark that kindle easily and burn with intense heat, pine knots rich with resin that burn long and steady, and even dried peat when wood becomes scarce. Each type of fuel burns differently with different heat outputs and burning durations, allowing you to tune your fire throughout the day to match changing needs for warmth, cooking, and light. The daily rhythm of fire maintenance reflects the deep integration of this heating system into Viking life. You wake before dawn to rebuild the fire from the banked coals that have smoldered through the night, adding kindling and small splits to create a bright flame that quickly warms the house. Throughout the morning, as cooking begins and the day's work gets underway, you maintain a steady, moderate fire that provides consistent heat without overwhelming the living space with smoke or unbearable heat. But the afternoon brings different requirements. As the brief winter daylight fades and outside temperatures drop toward their daily minimum, you begin building a larger fire, adding the thick, slow-burning logs that will carry you through the long night. This isn't simply a matter of throwing more wood on the fire. It requires careful attention to the arrangement of logs, the management of airflow, and the balance between heat output and fuel consumption. The evening fire serves multiple purposes, beyond simple heating. As your family gathers around the hearth for the evening meal, the fire provides the light necessary for eating, conversation, and the various crafts that occupy the long winter evenings. Women spin wool and weave cloth by firelight, while men repair tools and weapons, and children learn the songs and stories that preserve your culture's memory. Yet even as you appreciate the warmth and light that your fire provides, you're constantly aware of its demands and limitations. The wood you burn tonight represents hours of summer labor, cutting, hauling, splitting, and stacking fuel for these winter months. Every log consumed brings you closer to the point where you'll need to venture out into the frozen landscape to cut more wood, a dangerous undertaking in the depths of winter when temperatures can drop low enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. As night deepens and you prepare to bank the coals for the long hours until dawn, you can't help but wonder how your ancestors managed to perfect this complex system of heating and ventilation. The precise balance of airflow and combustion, the careful management of different types of fuel, the integration of fire management with cooking, lighting, and social life, all of this represents knowledge accumulated over generations of trial and error, success and failure, warmth and bitter cold. In the depths of the winter night, when the aurora borealis dances across the star-filled sky outside your longhouse, and the temperature has dropped to levels that would kill an exposed person, within minutes you discover the final secret of Viking thermal engineering. Beneath your feet, under the ash-covered floors and below the carefully laid stone foundations, lies a heating system so advanced that it wouldn't be matched in European building technology for another 1,000 years. You first learned about this hidden system as a child when your grandfather lifted a section of the wooden flooring to reveal the stone-lined channels that ran beneath the longhouse. At the time, the smooth-walled passages seemed like some kind of magic, perfectly fitted stone conduits that disappeared into the darkness under your home. It wasn't until you were old enough to help with the complex maintenance, these channels required that you began to understand the sophisticated engineering that your ancestors had developed to extract every possible calorie of heat from the landscape around them. The system begins several hundred yards from your longhouse, where a natural hot spring bubbles up from deep within the earth. Your ancestors didn't simply build their homes near these thermal features by accident. They carefully surveyed the landscape, testing water temperatures and flow rates before selecting the optimal location for their settlement. The hot spring that serves your longhouse maintains a constant temperature throughout the year. Even in the deepest winter, the water emerges from the ground at a steady warmth that feels almost hot to the touch. From this spring, a carefully engineered channel carries the heated water directly toward your longhouse. This isn't a simple ditch or rough aqueduct, but a precisely constructed conduit with walls of fitted stone and a gradient calculated to maintain steady flow without allowing the water to cool significantly during its journey. The channel is deep enough to prevent freezing even in the harshest weather, and wide enough to carry sufficient volume to heat the entire longhouse, yet narrow enough to minimize heat loss to the surrounding earth. As the heated water reaches your longhouse, it enters the subsurface heating system that your grandfather showed you years ago. These stone-lined passages run beneath the entire length of the building, branching and rejoining in a pattern that distributes the thermal energy as evenly as possible throughout the living space. The engineering required to create this system would challenge modern contractors. The stones must be cut and fitted with millimeter precision to prevent leaks. The gradient must be calculated exactly to maintain flow while maximizing heat transfer, and the entire system must be designed to be accessible for the periodic maintenance that keeps it functioning year after year. The warm water doesn't simply flow through these channels and disappear. Instead, the system creates a continuous circulation loop, with the cooled water eventually returning to the hot spring through a separate set of channels. This circulation ensures that fresh, heated water is constantly flowing beneath your floors, while the thermal mass of the stone channels themselves absorbs and radiates heat into the earth and foundation stones that support your longhouse. The effect of this subsurface heating system becomes most apparent during the coldest winter nights. While the central hearth provides immediate warmth and light for daily activities, the heated channels beneath your feet create a steady, comfortable, baseline temperature that persists even when the fire burns low. The stone floors above these channels never become truly cold, even in the depths of winter, and the gentle heat rising from below creates convection currents that help distribute warm air throughout the longhouse. But this sophisticated heating system requires constant attention and maintenance that would challenge even experienced engineers. The stone channels must be inspected regularly for leaks or blockages, a task that requires crawling through narrow passages beneath the longhouse with only oil lamps for light. Sediment from the hot spring water gradually accumulates in the channels, requiring periodic cleaning that involves temporarily diverting the water flow while workers remove accumulated debris. Most challenging of all, the precise balance of water flow and heat distribution must be constantly adjusted as seasonal changes affect the spring's output and the longhouse's heating requirements. The knowledge required to design, build, and maintain such a system represents generations of accumulated expertise. Your great-grandfather's stories tell of the master builders who traveled from settlement to settlement, sharing their knowledge of thermal engineering and helping communities develop their own heating systems. These builders understood principles of hydrology, geology, and heat transfer that wouldn't be formally documented by European science for centuries to come. Yet even this remarkable engineering represents only part of the thermal comfort that your longhouse provides during the winter months. The combination of subsurface heating, central hearth warmth, and the thermal mass of turf walls creates a living environment that maintains remarkable stability despite the extreme temperature fluctuations outside. When Arctic winds drive the outside temperature down to levels that would freeze exposed human tissue in minutes, the interior of your longhouse remains warm enough for normal daily activities. The contrast becomes most apparent during the brief winter days when pale sunlight manages to penetrate the thick clouds that typically blanket the landscape. On these rare bright days, the turf walls and roof of your longhouse actually absorb solar energy, adding to the heat generated by your fires and underground channels. The thermal mass of earth and stone that forms your home structure stores this solar energy and releases it slowly throughout the following night, extending the benefit of even brief periods of sunshine. As you lie on your bench tonight, covered with layers of wool and sheepskin that your family produced over the past year, you can feel the gentle warmth rising from the stone channels beneath the floor. This heat, drawn from deep within the earth and carefully channeled through your ancestors' engineering, represents the final element in a thermal system that allows human life to flourish in one of the world's most challenging climates. The integration of all these heating systems, central fire, thermal mass, subsurface channels, and solar gain, creates a home that provides not just survival, but genuine comfort during the long winter months. Yet, as you drift toward sleep, listening to the wind howling outside and feeling the steady warmth that surrounds you, you can't help but think about the incredible amount of planning, labor, and accumulated wisdom that makes this comfort possible. Every stone in those underground channels, every log in the walls, every shovel of ash on the floor represents human effort invested against the implacable hostility of the northern winter, a testament to the determination of your ancestors to create not just shelter, but true warmth in the heart of the frozen world. You stand in your storage house this October morning, surrounded by the year's labors transformed into winter's survival. The walls around you display not just food, but time itself made tangible. Weeks of summer sunshine concentrated into dried fish, autumn fat rendered into preserved meats, and the patient work of countless hands transformed into sustenance that will carry your family through the months when the earth yields nothing. This isn't simply a pantry. It's a fortress against famine, built one preserved morsel at a time, according to techniques your ancestors refined over generations of harsh winters. The process began months ago, during the brief abundance of summer, when every member of your household understood that their winter survival depended on their ability to capture and concentrate the fleeting generosity of the northern growing season. Your family's preservation efforts started in early June, when the first fish runs brought silver-sided herring and cod into the coastal waters near your settlement. These weren't ordinary fishing expeditions, they were precisely timed harvests, designed to capture fish at the optimal moment for preservation. The herring you caught during the summer solstice, when the fish were fat with roe and their flesh contained the highest concentration of natural oils, now hang from the rafters of your storage house like silver curtains. Each fish was cleaned within hours of being caught, gutted and split with precision cuts that opened the flesh to allow air circulation while preserving the structural integrity necessary for hanging. The drying process took weeks, with the fish suspended from wooden racks positioned to take advantage of the constant coastal winds that would slowly desiccate the flesh while the salt air provided additional preservation. But drying alone wouldn't have been sufficient to preserve these fish through the long winter months. Your ancestors learned to combine multiple preservation techniques to create foods that would remain edible for months or even years. The herring now hanging above your head were first soaked in strong brine, seawater concentrated by boiling until salt crystals formed at the edges of the pot. This salt penetrated deep into the fish tissues, drawing out moisture and creating an environment hostile to the bacteria that cause spoilage. After the initial brining, the fish were hung in the smokehouse your grandfather built decades ago. This wasn't the simple structure you might imagine, but a carefully engineered building designed to maintain precise control over temperature, humidity, and smoke density. The smokehouse featured adjustable vents that allowed your family to regulate airflow, ensuring that the fish dried evenly without developing the dangerous mold that could make preserved food deadly rather than life-sustaining. The wood used for smoking represented another crucial element in the preservation process. Your family maintained specific stocks of different woods, each chosen for its smoking properties and the flavors it would impart to preserved foods. Birch bark created the dense, cool smoke necessary for the initial stages of preservation, while juniper wood added antimicrobial compounds that helped prevent spoilage. Oak provided the steady, hot smoke needed for the final stages of the process, when the fish required intense heat to complete the drying process. The result of these efforts now surrounds you, fish so thoroughly preserved that they could remain edible for years if necessary, yet still retaining enough of their original nutritional value to sustain life through the winter months. When prepared properly, these preserved fish provide not just calories, but essential fats and proteins that would be otherwise unavailable during the frozen months when fresh fishing becomes impossible. But fish represent only one element of your family's preservation efforts. Along the opposite wall of your storage house, wooden barrels contain the results of your livestock preservation program, a carefully planned cycle of slaughter and preservation that began in late summer when your animals had reached peak fat content from feeding on the rich grasses of the brief growing season. The barrel nearest the door contains salt pork, prepared from the pigs your family raised specifically for winter meat. These weren't the random slaughter you might expect, but animals selected based on their fat content and fed a specific diet designed to optimize their flesh for preservation. The pigs were slaughtered during the first cold snap of autumn, when the cool air would naturally slow bacterial growth and provide ideal conditions for the lengthy preservation process. The preparation of salt pork required techniques that would challenge modern butchers. Every piece of meat was carefully trimmed to remove elements that might cause spoilage, then rubbed with coarse salt and packed in layers with additional salt between each layer. The salt drew moisture from the meat through osmosis, creating a concentrated brine that excluded air and bacteria. This process took weeks, with the meat turned and resalted regularly to ensure even preservation throughout each piece. The barrels themselves represent sophisticated food storage technology. Constructed from oak staves that had been seasoned for years, these containers were designed to be completely airtight when properly assembled. The wood was treated with beeswax and pine tar to prevent moisture infiltration, while the metal hoops that held the staves together were forged specifically for food storage, using iron that had been treated to prevent rust that could contaminate the preserved meat. In the corner of your storage house, shallow wooden boxes contain vegetables that have been preserved using fermentation techniques your ancestors discovered through generations of experimentation. Cabbage, turnips, and onions that were harvested during the brief autumn growing season have been transformed into fermented foods that will not only remain edible throughout the winter, but will actually provide essential vitamins that prevent the diseases that plague populations dependent entirely on preserved meat and grain. The fermentation process began with vegetables that were carefully selected for their sugar content and structural integrity. The cabbage was shredded and mixed with specific amounts of salt, then packed into containers and weighted down to exclude air. Over the course of several weeks, natural bacteria converted the vegetable sugars into lactic acid, creating an acidic environment that preserved the vegetables while maintaining many of their nutritional properties. This fermented cabbage, which your family calls sauerkraut, represents more than just preserved vegetables. The fermentation process actually increases the vitamin content of the original cabbage, providing essential nutrients that prevent scurvy and other diseases associated with diets consisting primarily of preserved meat and grain. Your ancestors discovered this benefit through experience rather than scientific understanding, but their empirical knowledge of nutrition rivals anything that modern science has documented. As you survey the preserved foods that will sustain your family through the coming winter, you're struck by the sheer variety of preservation techniques represented in this single room. Drying, smoking, salting, fermentation. Each method requires different skills, different timing, and different equipment, yet all must be coordinated to create a balanced diet that will maintain health throughout the months when fresh food becomes unavailable. Yet even as you appreciate the abundance that surrounds you, you're acutely aware of how precarious this security really is. Every preserved fish, every barrel of salt pork, every container of fermented vegetables represents a successful gamble against the uncertainties of weather, disease, and accident that could have destroyed months of careful work. The foods that will keep your family alive this winter exist only because of countless small decisions made correctly throughout the year. The right timing for slaughter, the proper concentration of salt, the precise balance of temperature and humidity during smoking and drying. The underground storage chamber beneath your longhouse represents the final stage in your family's year-long battle against winter starvation. As you descend the wooden ladder into this cool, dark space, your oil lamp illuminates a carefully organized system for storing preserved foods that will remain edible throughout the months when the surface world becomes too hostile to support life. This isn't merely a cellar, it's a precisely engineered environment designed to maintain optimal conditions for different types of preserved foods, each with its own requirements for temperature, humidity, and protection from pests. The excavation of this storage chamber required months of careful work during the brief summer season when the ground was soft enough to dig but dry enough to prevent the walls from collapsing. Your grandfather's generation dug this chamber, following techniques passed down from ancestors who had learned through bitter experience how to create underground storage that would preserve food rather than destroy it. The walls are lined with stones fitted together without mortar, allowing air circulation while preventing rodents from burrowing into the stored food supplies. The floor of the chamber consists of a layer of gravel topped with wooden planks, a drainage system designed to prevent the moisture problems that could destroy an entire winter's food supply. The gravel allows groundwater to drain away from the stored food, while the wooden floor provides an insulated barrier that prevents direct contact between food containers and the cold, damp earth. This seemingly simple design feature represents generations of accumulated knowledge about the relationship between moisture, temperature, and food preservation. Along the walls, wooden shelving systems hold different categories of preserved foods in carefully planned arrangements. The dried fish that forms the backbone of your family's winter protein supply occupies the uppermost shelves, where air circulation is best and the risk of moisture damage is lowest. These fish, now hard as wooden boards after months of drying and smoking, must be kept completely dry to prevent the mold that could make them inedible or even dangerous. Below the dried fish, barrels of salt-preserved meats rest on sturdy wooden supports that keep them elevated above the floor level. These barrels contain not just pork, but beef and mutton preserved using different techniques optimized for each type of meat. The beef was cut into strips and dried into what your family calls sharky, a concentrated protein source that could sustain a person indefinitely if necessary. The mutton was preserved in its own fat, a technique that created a completely airtight seal around the meat while adding calories essential for surviving the extreme energy demands of winter in the north. The organization of these preserved meats reflects sophisticated understanding of nutrition and meal planning that would impress modern dietitians. Your family didn't simply preserve random cuts of meat, they planned their preservation efforts to create a balanced array of proteins, fats, and textures that would allow for varied meals throughout the winter months. The salt pork provides the high fat content necessary for maintaining body heat in extreme cold, while the dried beef offers lean protein that can be easily prepared in a variety of ways. In wooden boxes lined with moss and birch bark, your family stores the root vegetables that will provide essential carbohydrates and vitamins throughout the winter. Turnips, parsnips, and onions, harvested during the autumn, lie buried in sand that maintains exactly the right moisture content to prevent the vegetables from drying out while preventing the excess humidity that would cause rot. This sand comes from a specific riverbank where your family has harvested storage medium for generations. Not just any sand will work for vegetable storage. It must be coarse enough to allow air circulation, fine enough to maintain even moisture distribution, and free from organic matter that might harbor the bacteria or insects that could destroy stored vegetables. Your ancestors tested different types of sand and soil over generations, developing an empirical understanding of the relationship between storage medium and food preservation that rivals modern agricultural science. The moss that lines these storage boxes represents another element of traditional preservation technology that your ancestors perfected through centuries of experimentation. Sphagnum moss, harvested from specific bogs during the late summer, possesses natural antimicrobial properties that help prevent rot while maintaining optimal humidity around stored vegetables. The moss must be harvested at exactly the right time, too early, and it won't have developed its preservative properties, too late, and it will have begun to decompose itself. Against the far wall of your storage chamber, clay pots sealed with beeswax contain the fermented foods that will provide essential vitamins during the winter months. These pots hold sauerkraut, fermented turnips, and other vegetables that have been transformed by controlled bacterial action into foods that are not only preserved, but nutritionally enhanced. The fermentation process requires precise control of temperature and acidity, conditions that your storage chamber maintains naturally through its underground location and careful design. But perhaps the most sophisticated element of your food Storage system lies in the grain storage bins that occupy one entire wall of the chamber. These wooden containers, sealed with tight-fitting lids and lined with aromatic herbs, contain the barley, oats, and rye that will provide the carbohydrate, foundation for your family's winter diet. The grain was harvested during the brief autumn growing season and dried to exactly the right moisture content, low enough to prevent sprouting and mold, high enough to prevent the grain from becoming too brittle to grind effectively. The preparation of grain for long-term storage required techniques that would challenge modern agricultural engineers. Each batch of grain was spread on wooden drying floors and turned regularly to ensure even moisture removal. The drying process took weeks, with the grain tested daily by experienced hands that could judge moisture content by the feel and sound of individual kernels. Too much moisture would cause the grain to mold or sprout in storage. Too little would make it difficult to grind and reduce its nutritional value. The containers themselves represent sophisticated understanding of pest control and moisture management. The wooden bins are lined with aromatic herbs, tansy, wormwood, and other plants that naturally repel the insects that could destroy stored grain. The lids fit so tightly that they exclude both air and pests, while small sachets of additional herbs hanging inside each container provide ongoing protection against infestation. Around these primary food stores, smaller containers hold the specialized items that will transform basic, preserved ingredients into varied and palatable meals throughout the winter. Clay pots contain different types of salt: sea salt for general use, mineral salt for specific preservation applications, and flavored salts that have been mixed with herbs and spices to enhance the taste of preserved foods. Wooden boxes hold dried herbs that were harvested at peak potency and carefully dried to retain their medicinal and culinary properties. The honey that will sweeten winter meals and provide essential calories occupies its own specialized storage area. Clay pots sealed with wax contain honey that was harvested from your family's beehives during the late summer, when the honey had reached optimal sugar concentration. This honey will remain edible indefinitely if properly stored, providing both sweetness and the calories necessary for maintaining energy during the coldest months. As you complete your inspection of the storage chamber, checking seals on containers and monitoring the condition of preserved foods, you're struck by the incredible complexity of the system your ancestors developed to ensure winter survival. Every element, from the drainage gravel beneath your feet to the aromatic herbs that protect stored grain, represents accumulated knowledge about the relationship between environment, food, and human survival in one of the world's most challenging climates. Yet even this abundance comes with constant anxiety about adequacy. As you climb back up to your longhouse, you can't help but calculate and recalculate whether these stores will truly carry your family through to spring. Every meal consumed this winter will reduce these carefully preserved supplies, and there will be no opportunity to replenish them until the next growing season arrives, if it arrives at all. The preserved foods that surround you represent security, but a security that depends entirely on careful rationing and the hope that this winter won't prove longer or harsher than the supplies can sustain. When the first blizzard of deep winter seals your longhouse against the outside world, transforming your carefully preserved foods into actual meals becomes an art form that rivals any culinary tradition. The dried, salted, smoked, and fermented ingredients that represent months of preservation work must now be transformed into nourishing meals that will sustain not just your family's bodies, but their spirits through the long months when the sun barely rises above the horizon. Your day begins before dawn in the storage chamber, selecting ingredients for the day's meals according to calculations that balance nutrition, fuel consumption, and the preservation of your remaining food stores. This isn't the simple matter of choosing appealing foods that it might seem. Every ingredient selection represents a complex decision about how to optimize nutrition while conserving both food and firewood throughout the remaining winter months. The dried fish that forms the backbone of your family's winter protein supply requires careful preparation to transform it from its bored, hard, preserved state into digestible food. You begin by selecting pieces based on their intended use: larger sections for the main evening meal, smaller pieces for the morning porridge that will provide energy for the day's indoor work. The fish must be soaked in warm water for hours before cooking, a process that gradually rehydrates the flesh while leaching out excess salt from the preservation process. But this soaking water doesn't simply get discarded. It becomes the foundation for the day's cooking liquid. The salt and fish oils that leach out during soaking create a nutrient-rich broth that will enhance everything cooked in it throughout the day. Your ancestors learned that nothing could be wasted during the winter months. Every calorie, every trace of nutrition had to be captured and utilized to maintain health through the lean season. The preparation of preserved meats requires equally careful attention to both nutrition and fuel conservation. The salt pork that provides essential fats for maintaining body heat in extreme cold must be desalted through a process of soaking and rinsing that removes enough salt to make the meat palatable while retaining the preservative effects that keep it safe to eat. This process requires warm water, a precious commodity when every piece of firewood must be carefully conserved, so the desalting water is reused multiple times before being incorporated into cooking broths. The dried beef requires different treatment. These leather-hard strips must be slowly simmered for hours to become edible, a process that fills your longhouse with rich aromas while extracting every possible nutrient from the preserved meat. The long cooking process breaks down the tough fibers that result from the drying process, creating tender meat while producing a concentrated broth that will serve as the base for multiple meals. Your family's approach to cooking during the winter months reflects sophisticated understanding of nutrition and energy conservation that would impress modern nutritionists. Rather than preparing individual dishes for each meal, your ancestors developed a system of layered cooking that maximizes both nutritional value and fuel efficiency. A single large pot might contain multiple ingredients being prepared simultaneously. Meat, soaking in the bottom while vegetables steam in the upper layers, each ingredient prepared optimally while sharing the same heat source. The fermented vegetables that provide essential vitamins during the winter months require minimal preparation, but careful timing. The sauerkraut and fermented turnips are already fully cooked by the fermentation process, so they need only gentle warming to make them palatable. But the timing of when these fermented foods are added to meals affects both their nutritional value and their flavor. Added too early in the cooking process, they lose their vitamin content. Added too late, they don't have time to blend with other flavors. The grains that provide carbohydrate energy must be transformed from hard, dried kernels into digestible porridge through processes that would challenge modern cooks. Barley, the staple grain of your family's winter diet, requires overnight soaking followed by hours of slow cooking to break down the tough outer hull and create the creamy porridge that provides sustained energy throughout cold days. But the cooking process must be carefully managed to prevent scorching, which would ruin not only the current meal, but also waste precious fuel. Your family's cooking techniques reflect generations of accumulated knowledge about how to extract maximum nutrition from limited ingredients while conserving fuel. Grains are often parched before soaking, lightly toasted in dry pots to develop flavor, and begin breaking down the starches that make them easier to digest. This parching also extends the cooking time that soaked grains will remain fresh, allowing larger batches to be prepared less frequently. The integration of different preserved foods into balanced meals requires knowledge that your ancestors accumulated through centuries of winter survival. A typical evening meal might combine rehydrated fish, slowly simmered dried meat, fermented vegetables, and grain porridge in proportions calculated to provide complete nutrition while using ingredients efficiently. The fish provides high-quality protein and essential oils. The meat adds iron and different amino acids. The fermented vegetables supply vitamins that prevent scurvy and other deficiency diseases. And the grains provide the carbohydrates necessary for maintaining energy in cold conditions. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of your family's winter cooking lies in the management of flavors and textures that make preserved foods not just edible, but actually appealing throughout the long winter months. The herbs and spices that were carefully dried and stored during the autumn serve purposes beyond simple flavoring. They provide essential micronutrients while making monotonous preserved foods varied and interesting enough to maintain appetite during the months when poor nutrition could prove fatal. The honey that sweetens winter meals provides more than just pleasant taste. It supplies the concentrated calories necessary for maintaining body heat in extreme cold, while providing energy for the physical work required for winter survival. But honey must be used judiciously. The limited supply must last through the entire winter, so it appears, in meals according to carefully planned ratios that balance palatability with conservation. The daily rhythm of meal preparation during the winter months reflects the integration of cooking with all other aspects of longhouse life. The morning porridge begins cooking before dawn, using the embers from the night's fire to start the slow heating process that will be ready when the family wakes. Throughout the day, ingredients are added to cooking pots according to their required cooking times, creating a continuous process that provides hot food while conserving fuel. Evening meals represent the culmination of the day's cooking efforts, complex combinations of ingredients that have been layered into cooking pots throughout the day, each element added at precisely the right time to optimize both flavor and nutrition. The evening meal provides not just physical sustenance but social cohesion as the family gathers around the central hearth to share food and conversation during the long winter nights. The management of leftovers and food scraps during the winter months reveals another aspect of your ancestors' survival wisdom. Nothing edible can be wasted when the next opportunity to obtain fresh food might be months away. Cooking water becomes drinking broth, meat bones are crushed to extract marrow and make bone meal for extending grain porridge, and even vegetable peelings are dried and ground into powder that adds nutrients to other dishes. Yet even with all this careful planning and sophisticated preparation, the constant awareness of limited supplies colors every meal throughout the winter months. Each portion consumed brings your family closer to the point where preserved foods will run out, making spring survival dependent on successful hunting, fishing, or trade with other settlements. The abundance of autumn preservation efforts gradually diminishes throughout the winter, requiring increasingly careful rationing as the season progresses and spring remains uncertain. As you bank the cooking fire for the night and contemplate tomorrow's meals, you can't help but appreciate the incredible complexity of the food systems your ancestors developed to sustain life through the harsh northern winters. Every technique for preservation, every method of preparation, every strategy for combining ingredients represents knowledge accumulated over generations of survival in one of the world's most challenging environments. The meals that keep your family alive and healthy throughout the winter exist only because of this accumulated wisdom, passed down through countless generations who faced the same fundamental challenge of transforming summer's abundance into winter's survival. As the autumn equinox passes and daylight begins its relentless retreat toward the winter solstice, your Viking community undergoes a transformation as profound as the changing landscape outside. The scattered rhythm of summer life, when families dispersed across the countryside to tend individual farms and fishing stations, gives way to an increasingly concentrated social existence centered around the largest longhouses in your settlement. This isn't merely a practical response to harsh weather. It's the activation of social systems your ancestors developed over centuries to maintain community cohesion during the months when isolation could prove as deadly as cold or hunger. The great hunt that marks the beginning of this winter transformation requires coordination that involves every member of your community, from the youngest children to the eldest elders. This isn't the random pursuit of game that the name might suggest, but a carefully planned community effort that serves multiple purposes beyond simply securing meat for the winter months. The hunt requires weeks of preparation, with scouts sent out to locate game trails and assess the populations of elk, deer, and wild boar that will sustain the community through the cold season. The organization of the Great Hunt reveals the sophisticated social structures that your ancestors developed to manage complex community efforts. Different families contribute specific skills and resources. Some provide the weapons and tools necessary for the hunt. Others contribute knowledge of animal behavior and tracking techniques, while still others organize the logistics of moving large hunting parties across difficult terrain. The division of labor reflects not just practical efficiency, but social hierarchies and obligations that bind the community together throughout the year. Young men who participate in their first great hunt undergo what amounts to a community initiation ritual, proving their ability to contribute to collective survival while learning the cooperation skills that will define their roles in adult society. The hunt provides opportunities for demonstrating courage, skill, and judgment under conditions that mirror the challenges the community will face throughout the winter months. Success in the hunt earns respect and status that influences social relationships for years to come. But the Great Hunt serves purposes beyond practical meat acquisition and social initiation. The coordinated pursuit of large game recreates mythological hunts described in your culture's stories, connecting the community's survival efforts with the cosmic battles between gods and giants that define your understanding of the world. The hunt becomes a ritual reenactment of divine conflicts, with human hunters taking the roles of gods pursuing the chaotic forces that threaten civilization itself. The community members who don't participate directly in the hunt play equally important roles in the success of the effort. Women organize the processing of game that hunters bring back, transforming fresh meat into preserved food through the smoking, salting, and drying techniques that will keep the community fed throughout the winter. Children serve as messengers and assistants, learning the skills they'll need when they're old enough to take more active roles in community survival efforts. The processing of game from the Great Hunt requires coordination that transforms individual longhouses into nodes in a community-wide food preservation network. Smokehouses that belong to different families are pressed into service simultaneously, creating clouds of aromatic smoke that hang over the settlement for days as tons of fresh meat are transformed into preserved food. The sight and smell of this preservation work serves as a visible reminder of the community's collective preparation for winter survival. The social dynamics that emerge during the Great Hunt establish patterns that will govern community life throughout the winter months. Families that contribute significantly to the hunt's success gain prestige and influence that affects everything from marriage negotiations to dispute resolution during the long months when the community lives in close quarters. Conversely, families that fail to contribute adequately may find themselves marginalized during the winter social season, a form of community pressure that ensures everyone participates in collective survival efforts. The division of meat from the Great Hunt follows complex social protocols that reflect both practical needs and community hierarchies. The most skilled hunters receive choice cuts that acknowledge their contributions, while families with young children or elderly members receive portions calculated to meet their specific nutritional needs. Surplus meat goes to families that provided significant support services, ensuring that everyone who contributed to the hunt's success receives appropriate rewards. But the Great Hunt also serves as a testing ground for the leadership skills that will guide the community through the winter months. The hunt leaders who successfully coordinate complex group efforts earn the respect and authority they'll need when winter conditions require quick decisions about resource allocation, conflict resolution, and community safety. The hunt provides a relatively low-stakes environment for identifying and training the leaders who will guide community survival during the more dangerous winter months. The conclusion of the Great Hunt marks the beginning of the community's winter social calendar, a series of gatherings and celebrations that will maintain social cohesion during the months when outdoor work becomes impossible. The Hunt Feast, that celebrates the season's success, brings together every member of the community for a massive meal that features fresh meat prepared in elaborate dishes that won't be possible again until spring. This feast serves not just as celebration, but as the final community meal before the long winter months, when social gatherings must be carefully planned to conserve resources. The stories told during the Hunt Feast establish themes that will be developed throughout the winter months in countless smaller gatherings. Epic tales of the hunt's success become part of the community's shared narrative, joining the stock of stories that define group identity and values. These stories will be retold and embellished throughout the winter, creating a shared mythology that strengthens community bonds during the months when physical isolation could fragment social relationships. The Hunt Feast also provides the first opportunity for families to display the results of their autumn preparation work, the preserved foods, crafted items, and accumulated resources that will sustain them through the winter months. This display serves practical purposes, allowing community members to assess which families might need support during the winter, while also providing opportunities for the social recognition that motivates individual preparation efforts. As the Tulha feast concludes and community members return to their individual longhouses for the night, everyone understands that the scattered independence of summer life has ended. From now until spring, survival will depend on the community's ability to maintain cooperation and mutual support through the long months when the outside world becomes too hostile to sustain individual families. The Great Hunt has tested and strengthened the social bonds that will carry the community through winter. Now those bonds must sustain the pressures of months spent in close quarters, limited resources, and the psychological challenges of prolonged darkness and cold. The approach of the winter solstice transforms your community from a collection of individual families sharing resources into a unified social organism focused entirely on collective survival and spiritual renewal. The celebrations and rituals that mark this darkest time of year serve purposes far beyond simple entertainment. They represent sophisticated social technologies your ancestors developed to maintain community cohesion, distribute resources equitably, and preserve cultural knowledge during the months when isolation and hardship could otherwise fragment the bonds that hold society together. The preparation for Yule begins weeks before the solstice itself, involving every member of the community in coordinated efforts that require precise timing and careful resource management. The brewing of mead for the celebration requires honey reserves that families have carefully hoarded throughout the year, combined with brewing knowledge that determines not just the alcohol content, but the symbolic significance of the drinks that will be shared during the sacred season. Different families contribute specific ingredients. Some provide the honey, others contribute herbs and spices that give the mead its ceremonial properties, while still others offer the labor and expertise required for the complex brewing process. Mudita, coordination required for Yule preparation, serves important social functions beyond simply organizing a celebration. Families must negotiate their contributions to the community feast, a process that reveals and reinforces the social hierarchies and mutual obligations that govern community life. Wealthy families demonstrate their status by contributing generously, while less prosperous families find ways to participate meaningfully despite limited resources. These negotiations establish patterns of reciprocity that will influence social relationships throughout the winter months. The collection and preparation of Yule logs represents another community effort that combines practical heating needs with profound spiritual significance. The massive logs that will burn throughout the solstice celebration must be selected months in advance, chosen not just for their size and burning properties, but for their symbolic meaning in your culture's understanding of cosmic renewal. Oak logs represent strength and endurance, while birch symbolizes new beginnings and purification. The selection and transport of these logs requires community cooperation, with teams of men working together to fell, transport, and position logs that may weigh hundreds of pounds. The spiritual dimensions of Yule preparation reveal the sophisticated theological systems your ancestors developed to understand their relationship with the natural world and the divine forces that govern seasonal cycles. The winter solstice represents not just the longest night, but the symbolic death and rebirth of the sun itself, a cosmic event that parallels human experiences of survival, renewal, and hope in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. The celebration acknowledges the community's dependence on forces beyond human control, while affirming collective determination to survive and prosper. The blot ceremony that accompanies Yule represents perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of your community's winter spiritual practice. This isn't simply animal sacrifice, but a complex ritual that combines practical resource management with profound theological concepts about the relationship between human communities and divine powers. The animals selected for sacrifice represent significant economic investments, valuable livestock that the community could otherwise consume throughout the winter. The willingness to sacrifice these resources demonstrates collective faith that divine favor will ensure community survival through the dangerous months ahead. The preparation for the blot requires specialized knowledge about ritual procedures, proper animal selection, and the theological significance of different ceremonial elements. The community's religious leaders must coordinate not just the practical aspects of the ceremony, but its spiritual and social dimensions. The ritual serves multiple purposes, appeasing divine powers that control weather and natural forces, strengthening community bonds through shared spiritual experience, and providing a mechanism for distributing valuable resources in ways that reinforce social solidarity. The selection of animals for the blot follows complex criteria that balance practical and spiritual considerations. The animals must be perfect specimens, free from disease or injury, representing the community's finest livestock. But they must also be animals that the community can afford to sacrifice without jeopardizing winter survival. This balance requires careful planning and community discussion about resource allocation, creating opportunities for democratic participation in religious decision-making. The blot ceremony itself creates intense, shared experiences that bind community members together through the darkest time of year. The ritual slaughter, performed according to ancient protocols that ensure proper treatment of the sacrificial animals, demonstrates the community's respect for the life forces that sustain human existence. The sprinkling of sacrificial blood on weapons, tools, and community members creates physical and spiritual connections between individuals, their tools, and the divine powers that govern their world. The communal feast that follows the blot serves crucial social and nutritional functions during the winter month. The sacrificial meat provides high-quality protein at a time when preserved foods may be running low, while the shared meal reinforces community bonds that must sustain members through the remaining winter months. The feast follows elaborate protocols that ensure equitable distribution of food while acknowledging social hierarchies and individual contributions to community welfare. The poetry and storytelling that accompany Yule celebrations serve as sophisticated information storage and transmission systems that preserve cultural knowledge through the long winter months. The skaldic poetry recited during winter gatherings contains not just entertainment but practical information about navigation, weather prediction, agricultural techniques, and survival strategies. The epic sagas tell stories that encode moral and practical lessons about community cooperation, leadership, and individual responsibility. The performance of these stories during Yule creates opportunities for community members to demonstrate cultural knowledge and artistic skills that earn social recognition and influence. Skilled storytellers gain prestige that affects their status throughout the year, while young people learn the narratives that will guide their understanding of proper behavior and community values. The stories also provide frameworks for understanding current events and challenges, helping community members interpret their experiences within broader cultural and spiritual contexts. The games and competitions that mark Yule celebrations serve important social functions beyond simple entertainment. Wrestling matches, riddle contests, and tests of strength provide opportunities for individuals to demonstrate skills and gain recognition while channeling competitive impulses in ways that strengthen rather than fragment community relationships. These competitions allow for the establishment of informal hierarchies based on skill and achievement, while avoiding the serious conflicts that could prove dangerous during the winter months when community cooperation is essential for survival. In gift exchange that concludes Yule celebrations creates networks of obligation and reciprocity that will influence social relationships throughout the coming year. The gifts exchanged aren't random tokens of goodwill, but carefully chosen items that demonstrate both the giver's generosity and understanding of the recipient's needs and preferences. Weapons, tools, clothing, and ornaments change hands according to complex social protocols that strengthen alliances while acknowledging individual achievements and community contributions. As the Yule celebrations conclude, and community members return to their individual longhouses, they carry with them renewed social bonds, shared spiritual experiences, and the cultural knowledge they'll need to maintain community cooperation through the remaining winter months. The celebrations have served their fundamental purpose, transforming a collection of individual families facing winter survival into a unified community prepared to support each other through whatever challenges the remaining winter months may bring. When the shortest day passes and your community settles into the deep winter routine that will carry them through to spring, the true test of social systems begins. The grand celebrations and communal hunts of early winter give way to the day-to-day reality of living in close quarters with limited resources, where every interaction carries the potential to strengthen or strain the relationships that determine collective survival. This period reveals the subtle social technologies your ancestors developed to maintain harmony and cooperation during the months when conflict could prove as deadly as cold or starvation. The daily rhythm of winter life revolves around the largest longhouses in your settlement, where multiple families gather to share heat, light, and social companionship during the long nights when darkness dominates the landscape. These gatherings aren't random social visits, but carefully organized rotations that ensure equitable distribution of fuel costs while providing everyone with access to the social stimulation necessary for maintaining mental health during the psychologically challenging winter months. The interior geography of these winter gatherings reflects complex social hierarchies and relationships that govern your community throughout the year. The positions closest to the central hearth go to the eldest community members and the families that contributed most significantly to autumn preparation efforts, while younger families and individuals occupy positions further from the heat source. But this isn't simply about physical comfort. The arrangement creates opportunities for informal education as experienced community members share knowledge with younger generations during the long hours spent around the fire. The work that occupies winter evenings serves crucial economic and social functions beyond simply keeping hands busy during the months when outdoor labor becomes impossible. Women gather to spin wool and weave cloth, creating not just the textiles necessary for clothing and household use, but opportunities for sharing knowledge about textile techniques, family news, and community concerns. The rhythmic work of spinning and weaving provides a soundtrack for conversations that maintain social connections while producing goods essential for community survival. Men spend winter evenings repairing and crafting the tools and weapons that will be essential for spring planting, summer harvest, and next year's hunting efforts. This work requires specialized skills and knowledge that must be shared between generations, creating mentor relationships that transmit not just technical information, but cultural values about craftsmanship, quality, and individual responsibility. The sound of hammering, filing, and carving fills longhouses throughout the winter, providing evidence of productive work that maintains community confidence in collective preparation for the coming year. The children who grow up during these winter gatherings receive intensive cultural education that shapes their understanding of community values, social relationships, and individual responsibilities. Rather than formal instruction, this education happens through observation, participation, and storytelling that gradually introduces young people to the complex knowledge systems they'll need as adults. Children learn not just practical skills, but the social sensitivities necessary for maintaining harmony in close quarters living situations where conflict must be minimized to ensure collective survival. The management of food preparation and consumption during winter gatherings requires sophisticated coordination that prevents both waste and conflict over limited resources. Families contribute ingredients according to established protocols that ensure equitable sharing while acknowledging different families' abilities to provide resources. The preparation of communal meals becomes a social activity that reinforces relationships while ensuring everyone receives adequate nutrition during the months when individual families might struggle to maintain varied diets. The allocation of sleeping spaces in shared longhouses follows complex social protocols that balance practical needs with relationship dynamics that could affect community harmony. Married couples require privacy, while unmarried individuals must be placed in arrangements that prevent inappropriate relationships or conflicts. Elderly community members need positions close to heat sources, while families with young children require spaces that allow for nighttime care without disturbing others. These arrangements require constant negotiation and adjustment as relationships change and individual needs evolve throughout the winter months. The resolution of conflicts that inevitably arise during close quarters living becomes a community responsibility that requires sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. Minor disputes over resource allocation, personal behavior, or sleeping arrangements must be addressed quickly before they escalate into serious conflicts that could fragment community cooperation. Experienced community leaders develop skills in mediation and conflict resolution that maintain harmony while addressing legitimate grievances and competing needs. The storytelling traditions that flourish during winter gatherings serve crucial psychological functions beyond simple entertainment and engineering knowledge that wouldn't be formally documented by European scholars for centuries to come. The construction of the loom itself required specialized carpentry skills and understanding of mechanical principles that challenge modern woodworkers. The massive wooden frame must be precisely square and absolutely rigid to maintain the thread tensions necessary for weaving complex textiles. The joints that hold the frame together were cut with the precision of ship construction using mortise and tenon joints that could withstand the enormous forces generated by hundreds of threads under tension. The loom weights that hang from the bottom of the loom represent a sophisticated understanding of physics and materials science that allowed your ancestors to create textiles with precisely controlled characteristics. These weights, typically made from fired clay or carved stone, aren't simply random objects hung from threads. Each weight is carefully calibrated to provide exactly the right tension for its particular threads, taking into account thread thickness, wool type, and the intended characteristics of the finished textile. The arrangement of these weights follows complex patterns that determine the structure and properties of finished cloth. Threads that will form the foundation of the textile, the warp threads that run lengthwise through the finished cloth, require different tensions than the weft threads that will be woven across them. The weights are arranged to create precisely controlled tension gradients that ensure even weaving while allowing for the complex patterns that distinguish your family's textiles from simple utilitarian cloth. The warping process that sets up the loom for weaving requires mathematical skills that would challenge modern textile engineers. Your family's women must calculate the exact number of threads needed for garments of specific sizes, accounting for the shrinkage that will occur during finishing processes and the stretching that happens during use. These calculations require understanding of how different types of wool behave during weaving and wearing, knowledge accumulated through generations of textile production experience. The actual arrangement of warp threads on the loom follows patterns that create the structural foundation for complex textiles. Threads of different colors and weights are arranged according to carefully planned sequences that will create patterns visible in the finished cloth. These arrangements require not just artistic vision, but mathematical understanding of how thread interactions will create specific visual effects in the woven textile. The daily work of weaving requires constant attention to thread tension, pattern, development, and quality control that demands both technical skill and aesthetic judgment. The weft threads that are woven across the warp must be inserted with exactly the right tension. Too loose, and the finished cloth will be weak and uneven. Too tight, and it will pucker and distort. Experienced weavers develop an almost unconscious sensitivity to these tensions, adjusting their technique constantly to maintain consistent quality throughout large pieces of cloth. The patterns that emerge during weaving reflect not just aesthetic preferences, but practical understanding of how different textile structures affect the performance characteristics of finished garments. Tighter weaves create cloth that resists wind and water, but may be less flexible and comfortable. Looser weaves provide better insulation and comfort, but may not hold up to the demands of outdoor work in harsh conditions. Your family's weavers must balance these competing requirements based on the intended use of each piece of cloth. The color patterns that distinguish your family's textiles require sophisticated understanding of dye chemistry and color interaction that rivals modern textile design. The dyes used to color wool threads come from plants, minerals, and insects that must be processed using techniques that extract maximum color while ensuring color fastness in finished textiles. Different dye materials require different mordants, chemical treatments that help dyes bond permanently with wool fibers. The preparation of dyes begins months before weaving, with the collection and processing of dye materials according to seasonal cycles that optimize color extraction. Madder root for red dyes must be harvested at specific times when the color compounds are most concentrated. Woad for blue dyes requires complex fermentation processes that transform the raw plant material into usable dye. The timing and coordination of these processes require planning and knowledge that integrate dye production with all other aspects of textile work. The application of dyes to spun wool requires precise control of temperature, acidity, and timing that affects both color, intensity, and permanence. Different colors require different processing conditions. Some dyes work best in acidic solutions, others require alkaline conditions. The sequence in which different dyes are applied can create complex color effects that wouldn't be possible with single-step dyeing processes. Master dyers develop an almost intuitive understanding of these chemical processes, creating colors and color combinations that identify their work and enhance their family's reputations. The integration of different colored threads during weaving creates patterns that serve both aesthetic and practical functions. Complex patterns can disguise wear and soiling that might be obvious in plain cloth, extending the useful life of garments that represent enormous investments of time and materials. Patterns also serve as identifying markers that allow community members to recognize the work of specific families or individuals, creating reputation systems that affect social status and trading opportunities. The finishing processes that transform newly woven cloth into usable textiles require additional skills and knowledge that complete the transformation from raw wool to finished garments. The cloth must be carefully removed from the loom without disturbing the complex thread arrangements that create its structure. Initial washing removes oils and debris accumulated during weaving while beginning the shrinkage process that tightens the weave and improves the cloth's weather resistance. The fulling process that gives woolen cloth its final characteristics requires controlled shrinkage that must be carefully monitored to achieve desired results without damaging the textile. Cloth is soaked in warm water and agitated to encourage the wool fibers to mat together, creating a dense, weather-resistant surface while maintaining the flexible structure necessary for comfortable clothing. Too little fulling leaves cloth loose and poorly insulated. Too much fulling creates rigid material that's uncomfortable to wear. The pressing and finishing that complete textile production require additional tools and techniques that give finished cloth its final appearance and performance characteristics. Heavy wooden presses smooth the cloth surface, while specialized tools are used to raise the nap, the fuzzy surface texture that provides additional insulation and weather protection. These finishing processes require judgment about how different treatments will affect the performance of finished garments under actual use conditions. The storage and preservation of finished cloth require careful attention to environmental conditions that could damage textiles representing months or years of skilled work. Cloth must be protected from moisture that could cause mold or rot, insects that could eat wool fibers, and light that could fade dyed colors. Storage containers and techniques preserve finished textiles while keeping them accessible for the garment construction that will transform cloth into the clothing necessary for family survival. As winter deepens and the work at the loom continues day after day, you can appreciate the incredible complexity of knowledge and skill that transforms simple sheep's wool into the sophisticated textiles that protect your family from the harsh northern environment. Every aspect of the process, from loom construction to pattern planning to color coordination, requires expertise that your family's women have accumulated over generations of textile production, creating clothing that provides not just protection and comfort, but beauty and cultural identity that distinguish your community's textiles from those produced by other groups. As the winter reaches its deepest point and your family gathers around the central hearth, wearing the woolen garments that represent a year of intensive textile work, the true measure of your ancestors' clothing technology becomes apparent in the subtle ways these garments manage heat, moisture, and comfort during the most challenging months of the northern year. The layered clothing system that keeps you warm and dry through weeks of sub-freezing temperatures represents the culmination of centuries of experimentation with fiber, fabric structure, and garment design that created one of history's most effective cold-weather clothing systems. The undergarments that form the foundation of your winter clothing system demonstrate sophisticated understanding of how textiles interact with human physiology during extended exposure to cold conditions. The fine woolen shirt that lies directly against your skin was woven from the softest, finest threads your family produced during the year. Wool so carefully prepared and spun that it feels almost silk-like against bare skin. This isn't luxury for its own sake, but precision engineering designed to create the optimal interface between human skin and the textile system that will maintain body temperature in life-threatening conditions. The weave structure of these undergarments reflects deep knowledge about how fabric construction affects thermal performance and comfort. The cloth was woven with a loose, open structure that traps air close to the skin while allowing moisture vapor to pass through to outer layers. This structure creates an insulating layer of warm, still air while preventing the moisture buildup that could make clothing damp and cold. The thread twist and fabric finishing were optimized to create a surface texture that feels comfortable against skin while maximizing the fabric's ability to move moisture away from the body. The middle layers of your clothing system provide the bulk of your insulation while maintaining the flexibility necessary for normal movement and work. The woolen tunic that covers your undergarment was woven from medium-weight threads in a structure that balances warmth against weight and bulk. This garment demonstrates the sophisticated understanding your ancestors developed about how different fabric weights and structures contribute to overall thermal performance in layered clothing systems. The construction of this tunic required pattern-making skills that ensured proper fit, while accommodating the multiple layers that would be worn underneath and over it. The garment must be loose enough to allow air circulation and layer compatibility, yet fitted enough to prevent heat loss through gaps and openings. The pattern pieces were carefully planned to minimize fabric waste while creating seams that wouldn't create pressure points or chafing during extended wear. The sewing techniques used to construct woolen garments reflect understanding of how different seam types affect both durability and comfort in clothing that must withstand harsh use conditions. The seams were sewn with specially prepared woolen thread that matched the thermal expansion characteristics of the fabric, preventing seam failure when garments expanded and contracted with temperature changes. The stitching patterns distribute stress evenly while creating seams that lie flat against the body without creating uncomfortable ridges or pressure points. The outer garments that protect you from wind, snow, and rain demonstrate perhaps the most sophisticated aspects of Viking textile technology. The heavy woolen cloak that covers your other layers was woven from coarse, oily wool in a tight structure that sheds water while maintaining breathability. This fabric represents the optimal balance between weather protection and wearability, dense enough to resist wind and moisture, yet flexible enough to allow normal movement and work. The finishing processes applied to outer garment fabrics required additional specialized knowledge about how to enhance wool's natural weather-resistant properties. The fabric was fulled to create a dense, felt-like surface that sheds water while maintaining flexibility. Additional treatments with oils and waxes enhanced water resistance while preserving the fabric's ability to breathe and maintain comfort during extended wear. The design of outer garments incorporates features that optimize weather protection while maintaining practicality for daily use. The cloak's hood is sized and shaped to provide maximum protection from wind and precipitation while allowing adequate vision and hearing for safe movement in dangerous conditions. The cloak's length and closure system provide coverage that can be adjusted based on weather conditions and activity levels, allowing the wearer to optimize protection against heat loss. The accessories that complete your winter clothing system demonstrate attention to the small details that make the difference between survival and catastrophe in extreme conditions. The woolen mittens that protect your hands were designed with specific thumb placement and finger spacing that accommodate the thick gloves worn underneath while maintaining manual dexterity for essential tasks. The leg wrappings that protect your lower legs provide insulation and weather protection while allowing the ankle flexibility necessary for walking on uneven, slippery terrain. The integration of fur and leather accessories with woolen garments creates a comprehensive protection system that addresses the specific challenges of northern winter conditions. Fur-lined boots provide the combination of insulation, weather protection, and traction necessary for safe movement on ice and snow. Leather belts and closures provide secure fastening that won't fail in cold conditions while allowing quick adjustment of garment configurations based on changing weather and activity requirements. The maintenance of winter clothing throughout the season requires constant attention to cleaning, repair, and adjustment that ensures optimal performance when lives depend on textile reliability. Garments must be regularly cleaned to remove oils and dirt that could affect their insulating properties, yet cleaning must be done carefully to avoid damaging delicate wool fibers or disrupting the fabric structures that provide thermal performance. The repair of winter clothing requires sewing skills that can restore damaged garments to full functionality using limited materials and tools during the months when replacement isn't possible. Small tears must be done to prevent enlargement, worn areas must be reinforced before they become holes, and seams must be restitched to maintain garment integrity. These repair skills represent additional specialized knowledge that women must master to maintain family survival equipment throughout the challenging winter months. The social significance of clothing quality and appearance extends beyond simple vanity to encompass important aspects of community status and individual identity that affect social relationships throughout the year. Well-made clothing demonstrates family prosperity and women's skills while creating positive impressions that influence trade relationships, marriage negotiations, and social standing within the community. The colors and patterns that distinguish your family's textiles serve as visual markers that identify your clan affiliation and social status, while providing aesthetic pleasure that enhances psychological well-being during the long, dark winter months. The careful coordination of colors and patterns in different garments creates harmonious appearances that reflect cultural values about beauty, craftsmanship, and social appropriateness. As you move through your daily routines wearing these carefully crafted garments, you experience the culmination of your female relatives' year-long efforts to create clothing that provides not just survival, but comfort and dignity during the harshest months of the year. Every thread, every weave structure, every design detail reflects generations of accumulated knowledge about how to create textiles that protect human life while maintaining the cultural values and aesthetic standards that define your community's identity. The warmth and comfort you experience represent more than successful technology. They embody the care, skill, and dedication of the women whose work makes civilization possible in one of the world's most challenging environments. In the depths of winter, when the howling winds drive snow through every gap in your longhouse walls and the cold threatens to penetrate even the thickest furs, the wool clothing that protects your family represents far more than simple protection from the elements. Each thread in the tunics, leggings, and cloaks that keep you alive through the frozen months embodies a year-long cycle of specialized knowledge, skilled labor, and community cooperation that transforms the fleece from your family's sheep into the sophisticated textile technology that makes human survival possible in one of Earth's most challenging climates. The wool that now surrounds your body began its journey toward becoming clothing nearly 2 years ago, when your mother and sisters made careful decisions about which sheep to breed, when to breed them, and how to manage their nutrition to produce fleece with the specific qualities necessary for surviving northern winters. This wasn't random animal husbandry, but precision agriculture that required deep understanding of genetics, nutrition, and seasonal cycles to produce wool with the length, crimp, and oil content that would create the warmest, most durable textiles possible. The sheep that produced your family's winter wool lived carefully managed lives designed to optimize fleece quality while ensuring their survival through harsh northern winters. During the brief summer months when grass grew thick in the upland pastures, the sheep grazed on specific plants that contributed oils and proteins that would improve their fleece quality. Your family's women knew which meadows produced grasses that enhanced wool texture, which streams provided the minerals that strengthened fiber structure, and which seasonal migrations would ensure optimal fleece development by shearing time. The shearing itself, performed during the brief warmth of early summer, required skills that transformed what might seem like simple animal grooming into sophisticated fiber harvesting. The women who wielded the iron shears knew exactly how to position sheep to minimize stress while maximizing fleece yield, how to cut close enough to harvest all available wool while avoiding cuts that could injure valuable livestock, and how to sort fleece immediately based on fiber quality, length, and intended use. The sorting of freshly sheared fleece revealed knowledge about textile production that would challenge modern experts. Your family's women could assess fleece quality by touch, sight, and even smell, identifying fibers suitable for outer garments that would repel wind and rain, inner layers that would provide insulation close to the skin, and specialty applications like rope, sailcloth, and fishing nets. The best fleece, long, fine, and rich with natural oils, was set aside for the most critical applications, while shorter, coarser fibers were allocated to less demanding uses. The cleaning of raw fleece required techniques that balanced thorough removal of dirt, vegetable matter, and sheep oils against preservation of the natural properties that made wool effective for cold weather clothing. The fleece was washed in a series of baths using water heated to specific temperatures, hot enough to dissolve dirt and excess oils, but not so hot as to damage the fiber structure or remove the natural lanolin that provided water resistance. Different types of soap made from ash and animal fats were used for different stages of the cleaning process. The preparation of wool for spinning represented perhaps the most skilled aspect of textile production, requiring tools and techniques that transformed tangled raw fleece into parallel fibers ready for conversion into thread. Your family's women used combs made from iron teeth set in wooden handles to align fleece fibers, working through the wool repeatedly to remove remaining debris while organizing the fibers into smooth, parallel arrangements that would spin into strong, even thread. The carding process required not just proper tools but knowledge about how different types of wool responded to different degrees of processing. Fine fleece for undergarments required extensive combing to create the smooth, soft preparation necessary for spinning thin, comfortable threads. Coarser wool for outer garments received less processing, preserving some of the texture and natural oils that would make finished garments more weather-resistant. The spinning of prepared wool into thread represented perhaps the most time-consuming aspect of textile production, requiring skills that took years to master and tools that were carefully maintained and passed down through generations. The spindles used for wool spinning were precision instruments, carefully balanced to maintain consistent rotation speed while allowing spinners to control thread thickness and twist. Different spindles were used for different types of thread. Light spindles for fine wool, heavier ones for coarse fibers that required more momentum to spin effectively. The technique of spinning required constant attention to the relationship between fiber preparation, spindle speed, and thread tension that determined the quality of finished thread. Experienced spinners could produce thread that varied from gossamer thin strands suitable for fine undergarments to thick, coarse thread strong enough for sailcloth or rope. The consistency of thread thickness and twist affected not just the appearance of finished textiles, but their durability, warmth, and weather resistance. The daily rhythm of spinning work integrated textile production with all other aspects of women's work throughout the year. Spinning could be performed while tending children, preparing meals, or participating in social gatherings, making it an ideal activity for maximizing productive use of time during the long months when outdoor work was impossible. The portable nature of spinning equipment allowed women to work wherever they were needed, ensuring that textile production continued regardless of other demands on their time. The storage and organization of spun thread required careful attention to preservation techniques that would maintain thread quality throughout the months or years between spinning and weaving. Thread was wound onto specially designed storage implements that prevented tangling while allowing air circulation to prevent moisture damage. Different types of thread were stored separately, organized by weight, texture, and intended use to facilitate efficient weaving when the time came to create finished textiles. The accumulation of spun thread throughout the year represented a form of wealth that could be converted into family comfort, trade goods, or gifts that strengthened social relationships. Skilled spinners could produce thread that commanded high values in trade, while families with large textile production capacity could afford the elaborate garments that demonstrated wealth and status. The quality of thread produced by a household reflected not just the skill of its women, but the family's ability to maintain high-quality livestock and provide the time necessary for skilled textile work. The knowledge required for successful wool processing extended far beyond simple handicraft skills to encompass understanding of animal husbandry, chemistry, tool maintenance, and quality control that would impress modern textile engineers. Women who mastered these skills gained respect and influence within their communities, while families that produced superior textiles enjoyed enhanced status and trading opportunities that affected their prosperity for generations. As you settle into your woolen garments for another cold winter night, surrounded by the products of this complex production system, you can appreciate not just the warmth and comfort these textiles provide, but the incredible investment of knowledge, skill, and labor that makes your survival possible. Every thread in your clothing represents hours of skilled work, while every garment embodies generations of accumulated expertise about how to transform raw materials from the northern landscape into the sophisticated technologies that allow human civilization to flourish in environments that would otherwise prove uninhabitable. But as you drift towards sleep, wrapped in layers of carefully crafted wool, you can't help but wonder about the countless hours of patient work that created this comfort, work performed by women whose names history rarely remembers, yet whose skills made possible the survival of entire civilizations in the harsh northern world. The great upright loom that dominates one wall of your longhouse represents far more than a tool for making cloth. It's a precision instrument that transforms spun thread into the complex textile structures necessary for surviving northern winters. As you watch your mother and sisters work at this loom during the long winter days, adjusting tension, selecting colors, and coordinating the intricate patterns that will become your family's clothing for the coming year, you're witnessing the application of mathematical principles and engineering knowledge that wouldn't be formally documented by European scholars for centuries to come. The construction of the loom itself required specialized carpentry skills and understanding of mechanical principles that challenge modern woodworkers. The massive wooden frame must be precisely square and absolutely rigid to maintain the thread tensions necessary for weaving complex textiles. The joints that hold the frame together were cut with the precision of ship construction, using mortise and tenon joints that could withstand the enormous forces generated by hundreds of threads under tension. The loom weights that hang from the bottom of the loom represent a sophisticated understanding of physics and materials science that allowed your ancestors to create textiles with precisely controlled characteristics. These weights, typically made from fired clay or carved stone, aren't simply random objects hung from threads. Each weight is carefully calibrated to provide exactly the right tension for its particular threads, taking into account thread thickness, wool type, and the intended characteristics of the finished textile. The arrangement of these weights follows complex patterns that determine the structure and properties of finished cloth. threads that will form the foundation of the textile, the warp threads that run lengthwise through the finished cloth, require different tensions than the weft threads that will be woven across them. The weights are arranged to create precisely controlled tension gradients that ensure even weaving while allowing for the complex patterns that distinguish your family's textiles from simple utilitarian cloth. The warping process that sets up the loom for weaving requires mathematical skills that would challenge modern textile engineers. Your family's women must calculate the exact number of threads needed for garments of specific sizes, accounting for the shrinkage that will occur during finishing processes and the stretching that happens during use. These calculations require understanding of how different types of wool behave during weaving and wearing, knowledge accumulated through generations of textile production experience. The actual arrangement of warp threads on the loom follows patterns that create the structural foundation for complex textiles. Threads of different colors and weights are arranged according to carefully planned sequences that will create patterns visible in the finished cloth. These arrangements require not just artistic vision, but mathematical understanding of how thread interactions will create specific visual effects in the woven textile. The daily work of weaving requires constant attention to thread tension, pattern, development, and quality control that demands both technical skill and aesthetic judgment. The weft threads that are woven across the warp must be inserted with exactly the right tension. Too loose, and the finished cloth will be weak and uneven. Too tight, and it will pucker and distort. Experienced weavers develop an almost unconscious sensitivity to these tensions, adjusting their technique constantly to maintain consistent quality throughout large pieces of cloth. The patterns that emerge during weaving reflect not just aesthetic preferences, but practical understanding of how different textile structures affect the performance characteristics of finished garments. Tighter weaves create cloth that resists wind and water, but may be less flexible and comfortable. Looser weaves provide better insulation and comfort, but may not hold up to the demands of outdoor work in harsh conditions. Your family's weavers must balance these competing requirements based on the intended use of each piece of cloth. The color patterns that distinguish your family's textiles require sophisticated understanding of dye chemistry and color interaction that rivals modern textile design. The dyes used to color wool threads come from plants, minerals, and insects that must be processed using techniques that extract maximum color while ensuring color fastness in finished textiles. Different dye materials require different mordants, chemical treatments, that help dyes bond permanently with wool fibers. The preparation of dyes begins months before weaving, with the collection and processing of dye materials according to seasonal cycles that optimize color extraction. Madder root for red dyes must be harvested at specific times when the color compounds are most concentrated. Woad for blue dyes requires complex fermentation processes that transform the raw plant material into usable dye. The timing and coordination of these processes require planning and knowledge that integrate dye production with all other aspects of textile work. The application of dyes to spun wool requires precise control of temperature, acidity, and timing that affects both color intensity and permanence. Different colors require different processing conditions. Some dyes work best in acidic solutions, others require alkaline conditions. The sequence in which different dyes are applied can create complex color effects that wouldn't be possible with single-step dyeing processes. Master dyers develop an almost intuitive understanding of these chemical processes, creating colors and color combinations that identify their work and enhance their family's reputations. The integration of different colored threads during weaving creates patterns that serve both aesthetic and practical functions. Complex patterns can disguise wear and soiling that might be obvious in plain cloth, extending the useful life of garments that represent enormous investments of time and materials. Patterns also serve as identifying markers that allow community members to recognize the work of specific families or individuals, creating reputation systems that affect social status and trading opportunities. The finishing processes that transform newly woven cloth into usable textiles require additional skills and knowledge that complete the transformation from raw wool to finished garments. The cloth must be carefully removed from the loom without disturbing the complex thread arrangements that create its structure. Initial washing removes oils and debris accumulated during weaving while beginning the shrinkage process that tightens the weave and improves the cloth's weather resistance. The fulling process that gives woolen cloth its final characteristics requires controlled shrinkage that must be carefully monitored to achieve desired results without damaging the textile. Cloth is soaked in warm water and agitated to encourage the wool fibers to mat together, creating a dense, weather-resistant surface while maintaining the flexible structure necessary for comfortable clothing. Too little fulling leaves cloth loose and poorly insulated. Too much fulling creates rigid material that's uncomfortable to wear. The pressing and finishing that complete textile production require additional tools and techniques that give finished cloth its final appearance and performance characteristics. Heavy wooden presses smooth the cloth surface, while specialized tools are used to raise the nap, the fuzzy surface texture that provides additional insulation and weather protection. These finishing processes require judgment about how different treatments will affect the performance of finished garments under actual use conditions. The storage and preservation of finished cloth require careful attention to environmental conditions that could damage textiles representing months or years of skilled work. Cloth must be protected from moisture that could cause mold or rot, insects that could eat wool fibers, and light that could fade dyed colors. Storage containers and techniques preserve finished textiles while keeping them accessible for the garment construction that will transform cloth into the clothing necessary for family survival. As winter deepens and the work at the loom continues day after day, you can appreciate the incredible complexity of knowledge and skill that transforms simple sheep's wool into the sophisticated textiles that protect your family from the harsh northern environment. Every aspect of the process, from loom construction to pattern planning to color coordination, requires expertise that your family's women have accumulated over generations of textile production, creating clothing that provides not just protection and comfort, but beauty and cultural identity that distinguish your community's textiles from those produced by other groups. Yet as you observe the endless hours of careful work required to produce even simple garments, you wonder how these women find the time and energy for such demanding labor while managing all the other responsibilities that keep families alive through the challenging winter months. As the winter reaches its deepest point and your family gathers around the central hearth wearing the woolen garments that represent a year of intensive textile work, the true measure of your ancestors' clothing technology becomes apparent in the subtle ways these garments manage heat, moisture, and comfort during the most challenging months of the northern year. The layered clothing system that keeps you warm and dry through weeks of sub-freezing temperatures represents the culmination of centuries of experimentation with fiber, fabric structure, and garment design that created one of history's most effective cold-weather clothing systems. The undergarments that form the foundation of your winter clothing system demonstrate sophisticated understanding of how textiles interact with human physiology during extended exposure to cold conditions. The fine woolen shirt that lies directly against your skin was woven from the softest, finest threads your family produced during the year. Wool so carefully prepared and spun that it feels almost silk-like against bare skin. This isn't luxury for its own sake, but precision engineering designed to create the optimal interface between human skin and the textile system that will maintain body temperature in life-threatening conditions. The weave structure of these undergarments reflects deep knowledge about how fabric construction affects thermal performance and comfort. The cloth was woven with a loose, open structure that traps air close to the skin while allowing moisture vapor to pass through to outer layers. This structure creates an insulating layer of warm, still air while preventing the moisture buildup that could make clothing damp and cold. The thread twist and fabric finishing were optimized to create a surface texture that feels comfortable against skin while maximizing the fabric's ability to move moisture away from the body. The middle layers of your clothing system provide the bulk of your insulation while maintaining the flexibility necessary for normal movement and work. The woolen tunic that covers your undergarment was woven from medium-weight threads in a structure that balances warmth against weight and bulk. This garment demonstrates the sophisticated understanding your ancestors developed about how different fabric weights and structures contribute to overall thermal performance in layered clothing systems. The construction of this tunic required pattern-making skills that ensured proper fit while accommodating the multiple layers that would be worn underneath and over it. The garment must be loose enough to allow air circulation and layer compatibility, yet fitted enough to prevent heat loss through gaps and openings. The pattern pieces were carefully planned to minimize fabric waste while creating seams that wouldn't create pressure points or chafing during extended wear. The sewing techniques used to construct woolen garments reflect understanding of how different seam types affect both durability and comfort in clothing that must withstand harsh use conditions. The seams were sewn with specially prepared woolen thread that matched the thermal expansion characteristics of the fabric, preventing seam failure when garments expanded and contracted with temperature changes. The stitching patterns distribute stress evenly while creating seams that lie flat against the body without creating uncomfortable ridges or pressure points. The outer garments that protect you from wind, snow, and rain demonstrate perhaps the most sophisticated aspects of Viking textile technology. The heavy woolen cloak that covers your other layers was woven from coarse, oily wool in a tight structure that sheds water while maintaining breathability. This fabric represents the optimal balance between weather protection and wearability, dense enough to resist wind and moisture, yet flexible enough to allow normal movement and work. The finishing processes applied to outer garment fabrics required additional specialized knowledge about how to enhance wool's natural weather-resistant properties. The fabric was fulled to create a dense, felt-like surface that sheds water while maintaining flexibility. Additional treatments with oils and waxes enhanced water resistance while preserving the fabric's ability to breathe and maintain comfort during extended wear. The design of outer garments incorporates features that optimize weather protection while maintaining practicality for daily use. The cloak's hood is sized and shaped to provide maximum protection from wind and precipitation while allowing adequate vision and hearing for safe movement in dangerous conditions. The cloak's length and closure system provide coverage that can be adjusted based on weather conditions and activity levels, allowing the wearer to optimize protection against heat loss. The accessories that complete your winter clothing system demonstrate attention to the small details that make the difference between survival and catastrophe in extreme conditions. The woolen mittens that protect your hands were designed with specific thumb placement and finger spacing that accommodate the thick gloves worn underneath while maintaining manual dexterity for essential tasks. The leg wrappings that protect your lower legs provide insulation and weather protection while allowing the ankle flexibility necessary for walking on uneven, slippery terrain. The integration of fur and leather accessories with woolen garments creates a comprehensive protection system that addresses the specific challenges of northern winter conditions. Fur-lined boots provide the combination of insulation, weather protection, and traction necessary for safe movement on ice and snow. Leather belts and closures provide secure fastening that won't fail in cold conditions while allowing quick adjustment of garment configurations based on changing weather and activity requirements. The maintenance of winter clothing throughout the season requires constant attention to cleaning, repair, and adjustment that ensures optimal performance when lives depend on textile reliability. Garments must be regularly cleaned to remove oils and dirt that could affect their insulating properties. Yet cleaning must be done carefully to avoid damaging delicate wool fibers or disrupting the fabric structures that provide thermal performance. The repair of winter clothing requires sewing skills that can restore damaged garments to full functionality using limited materials and tools during the months when replacement isn't possible. Small tears must be darned to prevent enlargement. Worn areas must be reinforced before they become holes, and seams must be restitched to maintain garment integrity. These repair skills represent additional specialized knowledge that women must master to maintain family survival equipment throughout the challenging winter months. The social significance of clothing quality and appearance extends beyond simple vanity to encompass important aspects of community status and individual identity that affect social relationships throughout the year. Well-made clothing demonstrates family prosperity and women's skills while creating positive impressions that influence trade relationships, marriage negotiations, and social standing within the community. The colors and patterns that distinguish your family's textiles serve as visual markers that identify your clan affiliation and social status, while providing aesthetic pleasure that enhances psychological well-being during the long, dark winter months. The careful coordination of colors and patterns in different garments creates harmonious appearances that reflect cultural values about beauty, craftsmanship, and social appropriateness. As you move through your daily routines wearing these carefully crafted garments, you experience the culmination of your female relatives' year-long efforts to create clothing that provides not just survival, but comfort and dignity during the harshest months of the year. Every thread, every weave structure, every design detail reflects generations of accumulated knowledge about how to create textiles that protect human life, while maintaining the cultural values and aesthetic standards that define your community's identity. The warmth and comfort you experience represent more than successful technology. They embody the care, skill, and dedication of the women whose work makes civilization possible in one of the world's most challenging environments. Yet as you settle into sleep each night, wrapped in layers of wool that took countless hours to create, you're reminded of the incredible amount of human effort required to achieve even the most basic comfort in the harsh northern world, and how that comfort depends entirely on the knowledge and skills that must be preserved and passed on to future generations who will face the same challenges of survival in an unforgiving landscape.